Welcome to the DFMI Business Lab podcast, brought to you by the Durban Film Art Institute, presented in partnership with DW Academy, supported by the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. DFMI Business Lab podcast draws inspiration from the 18-week online program which focuses on the business elements of filmmaking, aimed at equipping film producers with the skills to grow their careers. Our host today is Khosie Dali, who is an alumni of the DFMI Business Lab.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's sessions. We're going to be talking about co-production with Tamara Dawit. My name is Khosie Dali. I'm an independent film producer based in Cape Town. I produce commercials, short films, and feature films. Welcome, Tamara. Very happy to have you here today.
No, it's great to be with you in this virtual space, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions you want to put forward.
I've got so many questions for you, Tamara. But before we get into it, can you please tell me a little bit more about yourself and just tell me a bit about your background and tell me how you got into the film industry?
Sure. So I'm a Ethiopian-Canadian, Eritrean, Ukrainian, Scottish. My family comes from all over the world, and a lot of that background is really why I create stories, why I work on content. I started in music, I worked in theater. I've been working in film and TV now for about the last 20 years. But across all of that, I've really always been the administrator, the organizer, which in the screen sector means I'm the producer. And I've really focused on producing as a way to sort of use the access I have from sitting in Canada where I am today to help creators in the places I'm from, that my family's from, that don't have as much access and opportunity to share their stories with the world, or whose stories are often misunderstood or misrepresented because of the lens of who's telling them. So that's really why and how I produce. It's sort of a reaction also to the content I was seeing specifically about East Africa and Ethiopia on television in Canada as a kid, and knowing that like that's not the full story, or that's some sort of perversion of the story. And I think why I talk a lot, in conversations like this about co-production is because I also worked on the funding and the policy side. That's been the other sort of arm of my career, understanding how government policy works, understanding how financing works, working in large funding agencies for the screen sector and for the music sector. So I kind of try to bring that strategic approach to how I produce and how I try to help other people to produce.
I love that. Thank you, Tamara. And then let's just get into it. Just for filmmakers who may not fully understand, why are co-productions very important? Why are they an important part of the global film ecosystem, do you think?
For me, there's sort of two big reasons, and then there's a lot of other potential sub-reasons, which I think it's good with any piece of IP to assess. What are the needs? What are the gaps? What are the things that you have from your country or your community that you can bring to the table? And what are the areas where maybe you're at a disadvantage, you don't have access, or there's a certain thing that you don't know how to do, or a piece of equipment, a piece of technology not available in your country? And then also when you start to map, like, who are the audiences, who are the consumers of this story that I'm trying to create, of this film or web series or TV show, I think it's taking that information and trying to use that to inform, well, if I'm going to have gaps in doing this or getting it to a bigger audience, or the audience isn't just the people in Durban or the people in Kigali or the people in Stockholm, I think there's a bigger audience. Then to me, that's where the idea of co-production comes in, from being more strategic. Because for me, any story that I produce, if it's with Ethiopian writer-directors, I'm not just producing it to go into a cinema in Addis or to go on an Ethiopian TV station. I want it to get out to the rest of the world. So I think really deeply about where are those other audiences that I want to connect with, who will have an interest in this content. That often means you want to have a co-producer, because if I identify that I really think this content will play well with a certain audience in Australia or in Asia or in Germany or Holland, that becomes a rationale to start thinking about having a co-producer in those countries who would enable that content to reach those audiences, who will have a better relationship than I probably will, and a closer connection to broadcasters, to distributors, to independent cinemas. If I think that, this piece of content is going to play well with educational distribution. So there's that aspect of like understanding who your audience is and how you find the right people to work with to reach them. I think a lot of the time within Africa, we don't have enough money to make the content because of the financing tools available in our country, maybe what we can draw down in our region of the continent, and some of the soft international funds that we can access. So that's another, I think, strong reason is, you're going to have a financing gap, or you can only make the thing at a certain quality level based on the amount of funding you can draw down on your own in your country. But that if you can work with the person maybe between Kenya and Nigeria, you can have more money. Or if you can also bring in someone in Germany or in Sweden, the production value and quality will go up. That will also relate back to my first point about the higher production quality means you can potentially sell it to other people. You can reach more of a production standard that will help you with distribution. So to me, like those are the two big overarching pieces. It's the distribution and who are the audiences you want to reach. And your co-producer is sort of your ally, I think, in bringing your content to them. It's also that necessary part of closing the budget. But then there might be other reasons, which could be related to, like, you don't have a post facility in your country. But if you work with someone in Holland, they do. A lot of Ethiopians I know now are going into Kenya because there's a post facility in Nairobi that they can use, which is also, another reason to think about a regional co-production. It may be that there's a specific crew, or maybe there's an actor, or a production designer or a composer who is from your country or from your region, who's a member of the diaspora but happens to live in the UK or in Canada or in New Zealand. Again, those may be other reasons to start thinking about co-production.
I think you touched on a lot of good points there, Tamara. And have you noticed, like, some people are quite intimidated, or they feel like it's too complex? Why would you say a lot of filmmakers feel intimidated by this process of co-production? Is it the lack of knowledge, or what is it that scares them away?
I think it's complex. You have to have strong contracts. You have to have, I think, a real spirit of being transparent with the other people that you're working with. You have to do a lot of very detailed financial planning with each other, sort of role planning as well in terms of who's doing what, so nothing gets dropped. But I don't think those are reasons to feel nervous about doing this. I think that's the same as those are the same processes that I would be doing on a production if I was able to finance it all on my own and I wasn't working with other production companies as partners. So I don't get nervous about those things. I see my co-producers as more worker bees that are helping with the things. So I try to lean into what are the assets and the benefits of this versus, oh my God, I have to spend more on my lawyer because we have to negotiate this co-production agreement. And I think, sometimes when we're nervous or afraid of something, we lean into the fear, and then the fear will dominate us. And I think it's fine to be afraid, but keep the fear. Like, if you think of yourself as being in a car, let the fear sit beside you in the passenger seat, but don't let it be in front of you on the road. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, as in many markets around the world, the amount of financing available is shrinking. Even, here in Canada, a lot of the funding is being reduced. It's becoming harder to access. I predict for Canadians, irrespective of those like myself that produce in Africa, they will need to co-produce more because it will be harder to finance something 100% in your home territory. So there's that other sort of rationale out of necessity that I think co-production enables us to finance projects to perhaps do larger projects and to do projects that can travel to larger areas, which I think to me from a business and strategy point, it makes more sense.
And how do you find these co-productions partners? How do you vet them out? How do you know that people are the good partners for your project?
I think this is very, similar to dating. You have to meet people, you have to spend time with people. You have to also do like reference checks. Who are the other people that they've worked with? How did those relationships go? And I know when I start talking to people that they also start asking questions about me from other producers, which I think is the right approach. It's sort of like when you apply for a job, you submit references, and if I'm going to hire you, I'm going to call those references because I want to get that information about what it's really like to work with you versus maybe the fun experience I've had because I've met you at a cocktail at a festival or market. And I think it's also like you have to have a lot of deep conversations, especially in the beginning, about what the content is, how you want to make it, so that you can really ensure that there's alignment and you're all on the same page, because co-producers are not, and I think sometimes we wrongly just think, especially from Africa, that, oh, it's this like white person in Europe who's going to send me some money and they'll keep a cut for themselves. If that's what you're looking for, then to me, that's not really a co-producer. That's like a fiscal vehicle. But a co-producer should be someone where you can actually have a much more intimate relationship with, that you can talk through how you're making this piece of content. They can give you notes. They can be involved in thinking with you about the production process, about the distribution, etc.
Earlier, you also mentioned how it's very important to chat with your co-producer about contracts, about everything, and just being open. Can you just tell me more a little bit, like from your experience, what are the biggest challenges when you're navigating the legal system and the unions, like all the differences between the two areas? How do you manage that?
I mean, one, I think that to me, that's not the biggest challenge. I think the biggest challenge is like a values alignment on how you want to make the content, especially if you're talking about bringing in crew from North America or Europe into maybe like a rural or remote community somewhere on the continent. If you're talking about bringing together international crews with people who speak a variety of different languages or have a lot of different cultural or different workplace approaches, that to me is always the biggest puzzle of how to bring everyone together as a team and get them on the same page about why you're making this content and how you want to work together. I think the legal things are maybe the harder thing the first time around, because you're also going through that process as a producer for the first time. I think one of the helpful things to do for someone who's doing their first international co-production is think about if you can have an EP on the project, someone in your country who's done it before, so that you have someone to talk to be like, what do you think about this? Am I doing these things in the right order? And I think, you also have to have a lawyer, right? The same as you would have a lawyer if you were dealing with a sales company or a distributor or an equity investor. Like these are sort of core business components of your team that you need to have anyways. I think, there are some legal differences if you look at like, for example, the Anglo, I guess it's like the British and Canadian legal system, and then the more continental Europe legal system in terms of some of the things on authorship, on rights can be different. But I think this is also why it's important when you approach co-production to think about the jurisdiction. If things go wrong, where is the legal jurisdiction of this contract? And also, if you're the originating producer, you need to think about that very carefully so that it's helpful to you. Because if you're sitting in South Africa and the legal jurisdiction is somewhere in Northern Europe, how is that going to help you if something goes awry down the road? So I think thinking through very carefully all of these things. But I think this is why, the producers who have done it, I think have sort of a duty to act as EPs to help the next generation of producers who are approaching these things.
Okay. And from your experience, can you just share a few examples of like funding opportunities or financing mechanisms that filmmakers don't often realize that they can access through co-production? You did touch upon earlier, like it's important to get like certain crew or post-production, but what are the different financial opportunities you would say?
I mean, I think there's the realization that the funding that you can get as, let's say, you're a producer in Botswana, and maybe you have documentary, and you want to try to pre-sell it to Canadian broadcasters or European broadcasters. If you're able to have a pre-sale, which are also like increasingly rare, but the offer that you're going to get as a producer from Botswana, from a broadcaster in Denmark, in Germany, anywhere in Europe, is going to be very small compared to if you realize, oh, the co-producer in country, the broadcaster in country ABC is interested in my content. If I have a producer from that country as my co-producer, they are going to get a much higher offer on the film, on the TV series. So it opens up different pathways of financing. And I think that's where it's important, and a responsibility on us as the originating producer. Don't just go and talk to someone in Romania and France and take all the information that they give you about what's available about their system. We need to understand it. We need to have a sense of these are the things I think a producer from that territory can get, and they can clarify those things for us. I also like to go and read personally the rules of the fund that my co-producers are going to apply to. A lot of those are not in English, but with ChatGPT now you can get like a sense of what those things are saying if you don't speak that language. So I think it's we can't afford to be ignorant about what the funding opportunities are, what the rules are in the other countries and territories. Also, because unfortunately, not everyone is going to be trustworthy. And no matter how much you check, you research, you align on values, there will always be, I guess, bad apples in the barrel, sometimes intentionally and sometimes, not intentionally. So I think I try to understand as much as I can and then ask co-producers to also, if I'm sort of in that dating phase of working with someone, have them submit back a sort of financial proposition of what they think they can do with the content in their territory, their proposal of what they think they can do in terms of distribution in their territory, or in terms of suppliers or key crew that they're suggesting they could bring to the project. Because you want to be able to look across all of those things to make sense of if this is a good fit, not just about the person, but the business case for working with them in their country.
Mm, mm. And can you talk more about ownership? And like with what you're saying, it's very important to do your research and read all the documents and understand what's actually going on. But sometimes it's just too much, it's just too much to learn at the same time. And when it comes to ownership, like for example, let's say in South Africa, we've got, let's say, a local distributor, for example, and we've got the government funds. But then overseas, let's say Dutch, Netherlands, they've got more money there. They've got more resources, and it's like 80% of the budget. Then how does it work when it comes to ownership and rights and interests? And how does that work out? Is it like a conversational thing? Is it standard percentages that you have to look at, or how does it work?
I mean, I think this is the big issue right now, that faces a lot of producers in the global south or the global majority countries, and especially within Africa, because often there's very little money that you can put in, or no money, depending on your home country. And maybe that amount of money goes quite far in terms of the things you can deliver, because of course the costs may be lower than, what it costs to do a thing in Malawi is going to be hugely different from what it costs to do a thing in Norway, even though you're paying both providers at a fair wage for their home country. This is something I've done a lot of writing about for EAVE, because we've been doing this think tank work on inclusive co-productions. And it really, I think, starts with two things. You have to talk to your partners before you go too far down the road about how are we going to approach this film if, hey, I'm sitting in South Africa and I can only raise 20%, but that's going to get me to rough cuts. And you're going to end up doing 80%, which is going to be sort of that last 1/3 of delivering the film. How is that going to work out? How are we going to feel fair as partners with each other? If you're the person that, developed the whole thing. So there's different ways to approach this, but a lot of this depends on the funders. And I think the issue a lot of people are hitting up against right now in Europe is that, and the same in North America, is that the funders haven't caught up to this idea of we need to find a different way to recalculate value. And we need to value, you in South Africa, maybe you developed this thing for 5 years and you weren't paid very much or at all because of the amount of development funding available. Maybe we should actually assess ownership against not financial input into the content, but labor input.
Exactly, yes.
You are managing all of the production, all of the development, all of the edit. That's probably 80% of the work, unless this is a film with a lot of VFX. So I think it's about having a conversation with your co-producer about how they want to approach it. I do know that there are people doing things through their contracts to set up contracts that represent the project and the actual ownership of the project and the decision-making authority in the way that they feel is fair between each other. Sometimes that's not 80-20, sometimes it's actually 50-50. It depends on how you agree to do these things with your co-producers, what you all feel comfortable with in terms of how you are treating each other, how you are valuing each other. But the caveat is that a lot of those projects have to say something completely different to their funders, which is problematic. And I'm hoping that the funders will start to catch up to these things.
I think it really is problematic because I've seen in the past some projects where, as you were saying, a person has worked on it, like let's say here in South Africa for years and years and years, but because there's no resources and no funding, they don't really get too far for it. They only, you know what I mean? The Europeans will just take all the ownership and all the percentages. Very interesting. And I mean, I know there's a lot as well, but what would you say, could you share like 1 or 2 golden rules for a successful co-production? Like what would you think of like at the top of your head?
I think, it's aligning on the values, aligning on a shared and joint vision of success. So what is the end goal you're going towards. If this is maybe like a first-time writer-director from Burkina Faso, maybe they want to premiere their film at FESPACO. That may be the most important thing for them to do with that. Or maybe it's that they want to bring the film to Durban and that's where they want to start the career. Or that they want to be able to have the money to invest in doing sort of a community distribution or road shows into countries that don't have cinemas or as many cinemas as they do in Europe. The originating producer needs to, one, talk to your writer-director about that, but also have that conversation with the co-producers, because otherwise the co-producer may just be like, oh, the best case scenario is that we take this film to Venice or to Sundance, which may be good, but how does that balance with the expectation of the other key creatives? And I think there's often a way to mitigate that and manage to do both. So I think my golden rule is talk and talk in detail and talk a lot and talk about everything. And then I think on the other side, it's transparency. If you're signing an agreement in your country, send me a draft. And if it's not in English, translate the parts that are important for me to understand what you're signing in your territory so that I have an understanding of how that affects the overall project and vice versa. Be really transparent with each other and talk through things like the detailed line budget, the cash flow, the roles and responsibilities, because it's when those things, I think, go awry or are assumed and not talked about or documented, that's where there's the potential for issues.
So communication and transparency. I
Yeah.
love that. And how do you see the future of co-production evolving for African filmmakers, like in the next 5 years?
I mean, I think one of the things we need to do more often is before we run to Europe and North America, let's start by trying to work with each other in our regions. So
Mm,
I sort of would say with a project that you think is something that is not just for release in your home territory that you want to share with the rest of the world, assess what you can put into it from your own country. And to your earlier point about development costs, put them in as deferrals, put them in as in-kind investments, right? Don't just be like, oh, I never paid the writer. Well, think about
mm,
if you had money to pay the writer fairly in your territory, how much would you have paid? Right? Because the
yeah.
Europeans will do this. They will throw in all the things they did for free in development. They
Oh, yes.
translated your script on their own. They made a deck in their own language. You will start to see those things come up as costs. So we have to also be as detailed and bold.
Yeah.
It's not really being bold, it's being fair to yourself that this is
Mm,
all of the labor that I did to develop this. Um, and that has a value. So I think we have to include those things so that when we go to the table, we know I have this much money from my home territory because maybe you got some money from some person to invest, or you got money in the case of South Africa or Senegal or Morocco from your national fund. And maybe you're at 20 or 30% of your financing plan, but that's already something.
mm,
Then look in your region, talk to the neighboring countries. Are there things that you can get from a co-producer there? Do they have services that you don't have in your country, which may be more cost effective than bringing in, I don't know, if it's a sound person from a neighboring country, if it's a DOP, they will have likely a closer cultural connection to understanding your story and your way of approaching story. They may share the same language or a similar language with you. So immediately there's going to be less barriers, or barriers
yeah.
perhaps
It's
of
already a bit of a click.
intentionality. And then, maybe you get another 15 or 20% into your finance plan, then start to go out broader, right? Think about what are the funds that I can apply to depending on what country I'm in. Can I apply to the IDFA Bertha or to Hot Docs or to Ford or to Red Sea? Can I apply to Hubert Balls? Where are the amounts of money I can assess on my own to again add another level of financing? And then once you have, the sort of base ingredients perhaps in your pot, if you're thinking of this as like a co-production stew, then you start to look for, okay, what are the other countries, back to our earlier discussion, that I think are a strategic fit in terms of distribution, in terms of key creatives or suppliers that I need, and perhaps in terms of a good fit for financing. And then those are the countries I would say you start to target in terms of looking for just co-production partners.
Okay, okay. And I like the point you made about how we can put a line item for deferment costs. Because I think most of us as filmmakers or as producers, we like to shortchange ourselves. And we always do things for the passion, for the love of the film, for the love of the project. Whereas you should actually remember and log down and check every single thing you've done and actually have it on the budget for when the money does come in. So that's very important. And I feel like you kind of answered some of this already, but what would you encourage filmmakers to start doing right now if they want to do if they want to co-produce a film internationally?
I mean, I think one thing is that, and sometimes that we forget to do, is just to watch a lot of content.
Mm,
Um, Sometimes we get so sort of pigeonholed in working on our own stuff that we forget to watch the other stuff that's out on the market. And I think that is actually part of our job. It's part of our research, it's part of understanding. If you're going to go talk to a sales agent, look up what their most recent titles were and try to watch them. Or if you can't watch them, read about them, watch the trailer. And the same with co-producers. So you're not going into the meeting perhaps blind about the type of content that they've made in the past or their taste profile. Um, I think it's important. Like sometimes we go to festivals and markets and we just do meetings, 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 meetings. And I'm even guilty of this sometimes myself, but I try to aggressively make sure that I can watch films because we have to see the other films coming out of our region. Or if you're someone that makes art house or genre, the other big films in those types of films that are on the market right now, so that we can understand what is the market responding well to? What is the market interested? And how do we look at those in terms of benchmarking our own content? So sometimes it's that sort of homework.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, we talked about it a bit already, but it's helpful for us to keep up to date with what's happening with the funders in the countries that we may think about co-producing with. If there's a newsletter that you can sign up for because you're thinking about working in Germany, can you join the newsletter of the World Cinema Fund? If you're thinking about a certain region, can you get the newsletter from that region? So you can start to see when they announce who they funded, who else is in there. Are you seeing other projects from your country, from your region, from your continent? All of that is sort of under the idea of, market insights.
Mm. This has been very informative, Tamara. And I think just to kind of wrap everything up, what are your main things, or is there anything you haven't mentioned that you really want to part with the filmmakers that are listening?
I think one of the things that's important, and I think has come up in some other conversations I've done recently with producers in Africa, is sort of when are you ready to co-produce? I don't think you can co-produce your first project. I think we have to sort of, if we think of this as we're building an apartment building and each floor is another piece of content, do your basement and your like ground plus one or two first, which should be films done in your local market. Because if you go to an international market or if you come to the DFM and you're trying to meet with co-producers, generally their first question will be, what is the last thing you did?
Mm.
Can I watch that? They're going to ask the same thing when you talk about this is the director that I want to work with. So if that director hasn't made anything yet, this is not the person to try to position for an international co-production. You need to first then go back and make something maybe smaller. If you're trying to finance a TV series, think about, can you do a web series or some other sort of short form content? Can you make a short film with that writer director to help build their international presence, to have something that acts as a calling card to the funders, to the potential sales companies, to the potential co-producers. So I think it's important to learn all these things and learn how to co-produce, but get your sort of slate of stuff that you've done on your own in your own country. Know also how to access whatever funds are available in your country and make sure that you're eligible to access them, because a co-producer is going to expect that if there is money to be tapped into in your country or region, you know how to do that. You have those relationships and you've done it before, because you're asking the same thing of the French or Dutch or Norwegian person, that they know and understand the system in their territory and that they know how to access it. So I think it's sort of those things.
Mm.
Build up your credits, build up your slate, do things domestically. Make sure that you've also invested in the key creatives that you want to work with so that they have the experience. So then when you go abroad to look for your collaborators, you have that body of work to stand against, to show that I know how to do this, but I can do it in a bigger way if we collaborate together.
Mm. Thank you so much, Tamara. This was really, really informative. And it's very important for people to do their research, ask questions, communicate, and, just be transparent. Yeah, what else can we look forward to? Is there anything you're working on at the moment? Anything we can look forward to watching or learning about from you?
We're working on a big slate of films. I tend to not say anything until something is ready to be released.
Mhm.
I think it's not good to talk too much about stuff until it's done, but I'm excited about our slate, and we're working with a lot of, I think, really, really talented and fresh voices from East Africa. And I would say, if people want more insights into some of the things we were talking about, negotiating contracts and financing, and different tools for that, then I would point people to EAVE's website, which is EAVE.org. And on the impact section in there are the toolkits from the think tanks on inclusive co-production.
Cool. Thank you so much, Tamara, and all the best with everything that you're up to.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you learned something new or that you felt compelled to further interrogate your professional practice. Never miss an episode. Find us wherever you get your podcasts or sign up to filmart.africa for exclusive video content from this episode, where the African film industry unites.